Sirens screamed through the rain-drenched night on I-95 in Pennsylvania. Red and blue lights flashed against twisted metal, broken glass, and an overturned fuel tanker that still hissed with residual heat. Police officers cordoned off the area. Paramedics worked frantically. A man in a bloody denim jacket sat on the curb, his hands cuffed behind his back. His face cut, swollen and haunted, was lit by the ambulance floodlights. "Name?" an officer asked. Eddie Ramirez," he muttered. The officer checked his notepad. "Truck driver for Delta Freight?" Eddie nodded. "Witnesses say you ran a red light, lost control, and hit the school bus." Eddie looked up, eyes bloodshot. "That's not what happened." The officer didn't reply. Behind them, medics lifted a gurney onto the ambulance. A child's sneaker rolled across the asphalt. In the distance, a sobbing woman screamed, "He killed them! He killed them!" Eddie bowed his head as raindrops mixed with tears on his face. Eddie Ramirez awoke before dawn, as he always did. The alarm clock buzzed at 4:45 a.m., but he was already up, staring at the ceiling of his modest apartment in Allentown, Pennsylvania. The apartment was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the radiator. He got out of bed, careful not to look at the empty side where Rosa used to sleep. 2 years since she passed, and the indentation in the mattress still hadn't quite faded. By 5:30 a.m., Eddie was sipping coffee from a thermos, sitting on the loading dock of Delta Freight, his company for nearly 2 decades. The sky was still dark, the air cool and damp. The other drivers hadn't arrived yet. He preferred it this way. Quiet. No small talk. Just the road and the rumble of diesel engines. Carl, the dispatcher, stepped out of the office, clipboard in hand, his thick jacket strained against his belly and his breath puffed white in the morning air. "You're early, Ramirez." "I don't sleep much," Eddie ried, his voice low and gravelly. Carl handed him the clipboard. "Route change today. Emergency medical load to Scranton. Got to roll within the hour." Eddie raised an eyebrow. "Scranton? That's not my usual route." Carl shrugged. "We're short on drivers. You're reliable. I need someone I can count on. Just sign the manifest, and they'll load you up in 10. Eddie hesitated, then took the pen. His name flowed in neat, practiced cursive. "What am I hauling? Medical gas canisters, time-sensitive. Don't worry, it's all locked up tight. Just drive, Eddie." He nodded. No use arguing. He wasn't the kind to say no. An hour later, Eddie was watching as warehouse workers loaded sleek silver canisters into the back of his trailer. Some were marked clearly: oxygen, nitrogen. Others had older smudged labels. A few were dented, though nothing that seemed dangerous at first glance. Still, something about the load made his skin crawl. A young clerk in a beanie and fluorescent vest walked past. Eddie stopped him. "Hey, you guys double-check these tags?" "Yeah," the clerk said, without slowing down. "Manifest says it's all good. Nothing hazardous." Eddie didn't press further. Not his job to second-guess. He climbed into the cab, settled in, and began the journey north. The early part of the drive was peaceful. The sunrise cast golden light over the Lehigh Valley, and the roads were still dry. Eddie turned up the radio just enough to keep him company. Old country, static-filled. He tapped the steering wheel lightly in rhythm. But by the time he reached the outskirts of Wilkes-Barre, the clouds had moved in. Rain began to patter against the windshield, slow at first, then more insistent. Traffic thickened. School buses appeared on the roads. Kids with backpacks stood under awnings and bus stops, shivering in the cold. That's when Eddie started to feel it. The trailer was swaying differently, like it was carrying more weight than listed, and the braking took just a little longer than he expected. Instinctively, he slowed down and pulled into a rest stop. The lot was half empty. A few truckers were getting coffee or checking tires. Eddie parked, got out, and walked around the rig. He checked the seals, the tires, and finally the back gate. Then he noticed one canister wedged awkwardly near the edge, partially covered by a loose strap. The label was old, faded, but beneath the grime, a single word was legible: hydrogen. Eddie stared. For a moment, he thought he was mistaken. He wiped the label with his sleeve. The word remained. A chill ran down his spine. Hydrogen wasn't just flammable. It was dangerously unstable if improperly stored. He'd heard stories of entire rigs exploding from tiny leaks. And now, here he was, hauling a tank of it through school zones and city streets during rush hour. He climbed back into the cab and called dispatch immediately. Carl answered, gruff and irritated. "What now? You got hydrogen mixed in this load. So it's not marked. And I'm hauling it through populated areas. It's sealed. It's fine. Just deliver the load." Eddie's grip on the phone tightened. "I'm not a bomb technician, Carl. I don't sign up to risk lives. If this goes up..." "Eddie," Carl cut him off, "you want to keep this job, you finish the job. We've got insurance. Everything's legal. Don't be dramatic." The line went dead. Eddie stared out at the rainy highway. Somewhere in the distance, a school bell rang. Rosa's voice echoed in his memory. "Do the right thing, even if it costs you everything." He exhaled through his nose, hands trembling slightly as he put the truck into gear. He wasn't going to turn back, but he wasn't going to follow the usual route either. Eddie opened the GPS settings and began rerouting, avoiding tunnels, narrow roads, and most of all, school districts. He wouldn't be the reason for a tragedy. The rain came down harder now. Thick, relentless sheets of it drumming against the windshield as Eddie drove northbound on I-81. He kept the wipers on high, but it was like looking through a waterfall. The sky had turned an angry shade of grey, and visibility had dropped to under 100 feet. Eddie's hands stayed locked on the wheel, his knuckles pale. He drove slower than most vehicles around him, earning impatient honks from sedans and SUVs weaving by. But he didn't care, not with a mislabeled hydrogen tank rolling behind him. He knew trucks, knew how they sounded, how they felt when balanced, when loaded properly. And this load didn't feel right. There was a soft vibration in the rear axles, not rhythmic, but uneven, twitchy. He was familiar enough with medical gases to know most of them were stable, but hydrogen wasn't something to gamble with. One spark, one leak, one overheated valve, and it was over. His eyes flicked down to the dashboard. No alerts, no pressure warnings, no brake lights. But the silence only made his gut churn more. He clicked the radio off. He needed to focus. A few miles ahead, traffic began to slow. Eddie noticed hazard lights blinking far in the distance, red dots hovering like fireflies in fog. He tapped the brake lightly to reduce his speed further, and the trailer gave a slight shimmy in response. Not enough to concern a rookie. But Eddie knew better. He passed a yellow warning sign. Caution, school zone, next 2 miles. Below it, someone had taped a cardboard note in thick black Sharpie. School bus stop, slow down. His stomach twisted. He should have turned around, should have refused the load. But it was too late for that now. The GPS reroute he'd chosen to avoid tighter city streets had sent him through this semi-residential connector road. Technically faster, but not ideal for big rigs. He just hadn't expected it to coincide with the start of school hours. A flash of yellow caught his eye. Up ahead, parked awkwardly at the edge of the intersection, was a school bus, its hazard lights blinking. It wasn't moving. A small cluster of children sat inside, faces pressed to the foggy windows. One of the rear wheels looked slightly tilted. Stalled. "Oh no," Eddie murmured, easing off the accelerator. His foot hovered over the brake, but he didn't press too hard. The road was slick, and if he slowed too abruptly, the trailer might jackknife. Then he saw the fuel tanker. On the far right shoulder, about 40 yards from the school bus, another truck sat motionless. Steam billowed from under its hood, and the driver stood outside on the phone, pacing. There was a trail of what looked like fluid, possibly fuel, leaking along the curb. This was bad. This was very, very bad. Eddie flicked on his hazards and grabbed the radio handset. "Dispatch, this is Delta 341, Ramirez. I've got a school bus stalled at Pine Grove intersection and a disabled fuel tanker on the east shoulder. Road is narrow. Conditions wet. My load includes unstable cargo. Potential hydrogen tank. Requesting immediate reroute or instructions." Static. No reply. He tried again. "Delta Dispatch, do you copy?" More silence. The radio light blinked weakly. Out of range. Eddie cursed under his breath and looked around. No detour. No shoulder to escape to. Just a bottleneck with kids on one side and a possible fuel leak on the other. He checked his mirrors. A line of vehicles was forming behind him. He was the only thing standing between thee and this slow-motion disaster. Then he smelled it. Gasoline, subtle but distinct. It was in the air now. His heart thumped hard in his chest. He tapped the dashboard camera, manually starting a fresh recording. If this went south, someone needed to know what he was carrying. Someone needed to understand why. Then came the worst sound a driver can hear in this scenario. Brakes locking. A sedan, 2 cars behind him, swerved slightly. Someone had slammed their brakes too hard. The chain reaction had begun. The school bus was still immobile. He had to make a decision. If he tried to stop completely, he risked being rear-ended and compressed into the school bus. If he veered left, he'd slide into the line of incoming traffic. If he stayed straight, he risked hitting the stalled bus. If he veered right, into the leaking fuel tanker. His jaw clenched. He knew what had to be done. "I'm not going to let those kids burn," he whispered. Then, louder, as if saying it to Rosa, to God, to the road itself. "I'll take the hit." He gripped the wheel tight, turned it sharply to the right, and punched the gas. Just enough to clear the children's bus before impact. Tires screeched. Metal screamed. Then, everything went black. Pain came first. A sharp, dragging ache through Eddie's ribs as he blinked into the harsh, white light above him. He tried to sit up, but a strap across his chest held him down. His arms were heavy. Something tugged at the skin on his right hand. An IV. Then the voices. Vitals stable. Multiple fractures, possibly a concussion. Keep him sedated until... Wait. He's waking up. The blur resolved into 2 people in scrubs and 1 police officer at the foot of his hospital bed. The officer wasn't looking at the monitors. He was watching Eddie like he was a prisoner of war. "Mr. Ramirez," the officer said flatly, "you're under investigation for reckless endangerment, vehicular assault, and potential manslaughter." Eddie blinked again. The words didn't make sense. The pain in his chest roared louder than any accusation. "What happened?" His voice cracked like sandpaper. "You don't remember the accident?" the officer asked. "I remember the school bus," Eddie said slowly, the image of those blinking lights still fresh behind his eyes. "And the tanker? You swerved across 2 lanes and struck a parked vehicle, causing a chain explosion, several injuries, property damage. There was a bus full of kids." "I know," Eddie interrupted, coughing. "That's why I—" He stopped. What was the point? No one would believe he'd made that choice on purpose. 3 days passed, in a fog of bandages, noise, and sterile smells. Eddie's hospital room became a revolving door of doctors, detectives, and a few angry reporters shouting from the hallway. On the 3rd morning, a television played in the background as Eddie stared out the window at the grey clouds. Local truck driver Eddie Ramirez is at the center of a growing investigation after a devastating crash involving a school bus and a fuel tanker last week. Though no fatalities were reported, 5 people remain hospitalized, including 1 child. Preliminary reports suggest driver negligence may have played a role. Negligence. The word slammed harder than any impact. Eddie closed his eyes. He didn't care about the news. He didn't care that the world believed he was guilty. He cared that the kids had lived. That had to be enough. By the time they removed his handcuffs for good behavior, Eddie was able to walk slowly down the hallway with the help of a nurse. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't protest when they told him the company had let him go. Delta Freight had released a statement disavowing him. Driver was acting outside company protocol, they said. "We are cooperating fully with authorities." He was alone. No family to visit, no one to fight for him, no calls, no letters. And still, he didn't speak. Not about the cargo, not about the decision, not about the voice in his head that whispered Rosa's words just before the impact. "Do the right thing, even if it costs you everything." 2 weeks after the accident, Officer Maria Chen, with the Pennsylvania State Police, visited his hospital room. She was calm, mid-30s, with eyes that missed nothing. She didn't accuse, she didn't threaten. She sat quietly in the plastic chair and folded her hands. "We've recovered your truck's black box," she said. Eddie didn't reply. "I've been reviewing the data, the steering input, the throttle, the dashcam footage. There's something I want you to hear." She pulled out a tablet and played a clip. The screen flickered. Rain streaked the camera lens. Then came Eddie's voice, low but clear. "If this thing blows, it takes the kids. I have to move it. I have to move it." Maria paused the video. "You were aware the tanker might explode?" "Yes." "And your cargo, was it dangerous?" Eddie nodded, his throat tight. "1 mislabeled hydrogen tank. I found it during the stop near Hazleton. Called it in. Dispatch told me to keep going." Maria raised an eyebrow. "And you didn't think to refuse?" "I did," he said, "but not out loud." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Maria stood. "I don't think you're the villain they're painting you as, Mr. Ramirez." "I'm not a hero either." She gave a quiet nod. "Maybe, but I've seen plenty of men who crashed a truck to save themselves. Not many who crash one to save others." She left without saying more. Later that night, a nurse entered with a small envelope. "It's from one of the kids' parents," she said softly. Eddie opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten note. "My son was on that bus. He came home with glass in his hair and tears on his face, but he came home. He said a man in a big truck threw something at their window just before the crash, a little angel keychain. Thank you." Taped to the card was the keychain. Eddie stared at it for a long time. Then he wept. The NTSB lab in Harrisburg was quiet, except for the soft tapping of keyboards and the hum of fluorescent lights. Officer Maria Chen leaned over her desk, her brows furrowed as the video replayed again, dashcam footage from Eddie Ramirez's truck. Rain streaked across the windshield, the image blurry in places. The school bus loomed in the frame. Then, that voice again. "If this thing blows, it takes the kids. I have to move it. I have to move it." Maria paused the clip and leaned back in her chair. She had watched this footage a dozen times, examined every millisecond of braking data, steering correction and acceleration curve. None of it aligned with the narrative in the early reports. It wasn't reckless, it was calculated, and it was fast. She clicked to another window, analyzed brake pressure logs from the truck's black box. The system had recorded 3 distinct brake inputs in the final seconds: an initial deceleration, a release, and then a sudden rightward torque, combined with throttle increase. "Most drivers freeze," she murmured. He adjusted. He aimed. Across from her, David Patel, the lead investigator from NTSB, sipped from a paper cup and glanced at the screen. "You're convinced?" "I'm not just convinced," Maria replied. "I think Eddie Ramirez saved those kids." David raised an eyebrow. "That's not what the initial reports say." Maria tapped a document beside her. The initial reports were based on eyewitnesses who saw smoke and flames and a jackknifed rig. None of them saw what happened before the impact. None of them knew what Ramirez was hauling. David set his coffee down. "Hydrogen? One mislabeled canister in a batch of oxygen. Eddie found it before the crash, called it in. Dispatch told him to keep going." David's brow darkened. "That's criminal." "Only if someone investigates it," Maria said, her voice low. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension thick between them. Then Maria turned her screen and pointed. "This is the part that matters most." The clip replayed. "I'll take the hit." She paused it again. He made a decision. He saw the tanker, the leaking fuel, the stalled bus, and chose the lesser evil. He took the hit, on purpose. That afternoon, Maria met with the Assistant District Attorney, Sandra Keating, in a conference room at the precinct. A manila folder filled with evidence sat between them. "Are you saying Ramirez is innocent?" Sandra asked, flipping through the printed transcripts. "I'm saying he's not guilty of what we charged him with," Maria replied. "He still swerved into a fuel tanker," Sandra argued. "There was property damage, injuries." "Yes, but the black box and dash cam prove intent. He swerved to avoid a greater tragedy. His cargo could have ignited with a simple rear-end collision. The fuel truck was leaking. A stalled school bus, full of children, was feet away." Sandra didn't respond at first. Maria leaned forward. "You want to charge someone?" "Charge Delta Freight. They forced him to continue with unstable cargo. They ignored his call. They hung him out to dry." Sandra closed the folder and exhaled. "I'll need to review this thoroughly." "You should," Maria said. "Because if this goes to trial and we bury a man who risked his life to save children, It won't be just Ramirez who looks guilty. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Eddie was finally discharged. He stepped into the cold January air, wearing an oversized coat the nurse had loaned him. His left leg was still wrapped and a rib brace pressed tight under his shirt. But he was walking, breathing, free. He didn't know where to go. He had no job, no home. His lease had expired while he was hospitalized. No money either. Just a bag with a few clothes, some pills, and the angel keychain he kept hidden in his coat pocket. Maria found him standing at the bus stop, staring at the traffic. "You're not easy to find without a phone," she said gently. Eddie turned, surprised. "I figured you were done with me." "I'm not." She handed him a folder. "Your charges are being reviewed, and you're not alone anymore." Eddie didn't open it. "I don't need redemption." Maria looked at him seriously. "Then what do you need?" After a pause, he replied, "A quiet road. One that doesn't end in insurance." She nodded. Slowly. "We're working on it." Later that week, public sentiment began to shift. Local news stations aired edited footage from the black box. Reporters changed their tone. A segment titled "Truck Driver or Guardian Angel" began circulating on social media. A former firefighter appeared on TV, analyzing the footage frame by frame. This man made a heroic choice. That impact should have killed him. He absorbed the explosion to protect others. Letters began arriving at the hospital, even though Eddie had already left. One read, "You don't know me, but my daughter was on that bus. You gave her a chance to graduate, to grow up. That's more than most fathers ever get to do. Thank you." Maria kept them all in a box. She didn't know if Eddie would want them someday, but she couldn't let them go. The headquarters of Delta Freight sat on the edge of an industrial park in Allentown, its glass facade reflecting cold winter skies. Inside, the air was thick with unease. Phone lines buzzed non-stop. Emails poured in. News helicopters occasionally hovered overhead. Carl Merritt, the operations manager, sat behind his desk, jaw clenched as he watched the morning news. A panel of experts discussed the black box footage again. According to the NTSB report, one commentator said, the truck was carrying mislabeled hydrogen under pressure, and the driver, Eddie Ramirez, diverted it away from a stalled school bus at great personal risk. Carl muted the TV. The PR department had already issued a carefully worded statement. Delta Freight is cooperating with authorities and takes safety regulations seriously. But inside the building, no one was talking. At least, not officially. Except for one. Maria Chen sat across from Rosa Alvarez, a former logistics assistant at Delta who had left the company 2 months earlier. They met in a diner outside of town, neutral ground. Rosa sipped nervously on her coffee, glancing around the room. "I'm putting a lot on the line just being here," she said. Maria slid a document envelope across the table. "And I'm not asking you to take the fall. I just want the truth." Rosa opened the envelope. Inside were copies of warehouse manifests, shift logs, and Eddie's dispatch transcript. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through them. This is what I thought you'd find," she whispered. "There were complaints about mislabeling last year. I remember 2 gas deliveries flagged for improper storage. One of them was hydrogen too." "Filed formally?" Maria asked. Rosa nodded. To Carl. He told us to fix it quietly. Said too many reports would bring inspectors. Maria leaned in. Did Eddie know any of this? No, Rosa replied quickly. He never questioned loads unless something looked off. Most drivers didn't. He wasn't the kind to stir up trouble, but he did call about the mislabeled tank. Rosa sighed. That's what got him into this mess. That call should have triggered a hazmat review. But instead of investigating, they threatened to fire him. Maria closed her notepad. I need one more thing. Proof that Delta Freight knowingly suppressed safety violations. Can you get me that? Rosa hesitated, then nodded. I kept my emails. You'll have them by tonight. That evening, in a secure NTSB conference room, Maria laid the printouts on the table. David Patel and ADA Sandra Keating sat across from her, their faces tight with tension. These are internal memos from Delta Freight, Maria explained. One shows they received a formal warning from the Department of Transportation 6 months ago. Another includes direct orders to relabel rather than replace damaged cylinders to meet deadlines. Sandra read silently, then looked up. They falsified inventory and knowingly placed drivers and the public at risk, Maria added. Eddie Ramirez was just the last domino to fall, but the real failure started in their warehouse. David exhaled. This changes everything. Charges against Eddie need to be dropped, fully, publicly, Maria said. And Delta Freight needs to be investigated. Sandra nodded slowly. It's time we stop chasing the wrong suspect. Eddie didn't know about any of this yet. He was staying at a halfway shelter on the edge of Scranton, sharing a room with 3 other men who rarely spoke. He spent his days helping in the kitchen or sweeping floors. The staff offered him job postings, janitorial work, warehouse shifts, but he declined them all. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Everywhere he went, people stared, sometimes with pity, sometimes suspicion, sometimes awe. But no one really saw him, not as he saw himself, a man trying to escape the weight of being remembered for the worst day of his life. He avoided the news, didn't check social media. The only thing he kept close was the angel keychain, now darkened from soot, but still intact. He rolled it between his fingers like a talisman, a reminder that at least one life had been saved. One afternoon, he passed a newsstand outside a corner store. The front page of the Morning Call caught his eye. Whistleblower. Delta Freight knew of hazards before crash. DA reviews evidence for corporate charges. Ramirez may be cleared. He stood frozen, breath caught in his throat. A passerby recognized him, whispering something under their breath, then moving on. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt numb. The next day, Maria found him at the shelter. He was wiping down tables when she entered. You're not easy to track, she said. Eddie didn't turn. Didn't want to be. Well, she said, I brought something for you. She handed him a manila envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was an official letter from the ADA's office. All charges against Mr. Edward Ramirez have been dismissed with prejudice. An investigation is ongoing regarding Delta Freight's violation of federal safety laws. Eddie read the letter twice. Is that it? He asked finally. I'm just done? Maria's voice softened. You're free, Eddie. You're not just not guilty, you were right. You made the hardest choice and you saved lives. He stared at the letter a long time. Then he folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. "What now?" he asked. Maria smiled gently. "That's up to you." It was a quiet morning when the invitation came. The envelope was cream-colored, embossed with the official seal of the Pennsylvania Senate Committee on Transportation Oversight. Inside, a single card bore neatly typed words. "You are cordially invited to attend and speak at the upcoming public hearing regarding the Delta Freight incident and the need for federal safety reforms. Your presence, while not required, would honor the lives impacted and the changes now underway." Eddie Ramirez sat with it for nearly an hour, his calloused hands brushing over the embossed seal again and again. He'd never been invited to anything like this. Not to a hearing, not to a ceremony, not to anything official. He didn't know if he wanted to go. That afternoon, he walked to the small park behind the shelter where he'd been staying. The January wind was biting, but the sun peeked through, casting slanted gold over the leafless trees. He sat on a bench overlooking a frozen pond. In his pocket was the angel keychain, now strung with a fresh leather cord. The soot had faded, but he hadn't tried to clean it fully. It meant something now, not just survival, not just luck, but a choice. The sound of sneakers crunching on gravel drew his attention. A woman approached, bundled in a brown coat and scarf, her hair tucked under a knit hat. A little girl walked beside her, clutching her hand. He recognized them. The woman was the one who had written the letter, the mother of one of the kids on the school bus. She stopped a few feet away, uncertain. "Mr. Ramirez?" Eddie nodded. "Yes." She stepped closer. Her voice trembled slightly. "We've been hoping to find you. My daughter..." She asked if she could meet the man who saved her life. Eddie looked at the girl. She was maybe 9. Wide brown eyes. She wore a purple backpack covered in stickers. He cleared his throat. "Hello." The girl stepped forward and held out a small paper bag. "We made cookies." He took the bag gently. "Thank you." The girl smiled. "You threw me this," she said, pointing to the angel now resting on the bench beside him. Eddie nodded. "Yeah, I hoped you'd catch it." "I did," she said. "It was the only thing I held on to the whole time. It made me feel safe." The mother wiped a tear from her cheek. "We just wanted to say thank you. And if you ever need anything, ever, we're here." Eddie didn't know what to say. He simply reached out and shook her hand, then knelt slightly and handed the girl the angel charm. "No," she said, trying to give it back. "It's yours." Eddie shook his head. "It was always meant for you." 2 weeks later, Eddie walked into the grand rotunda of the Pennsylvania Capitol. He wore a suit someone from the shelter had helped him find at Goodwill. It didn't fit perfectly, but it was clean. His shoes were polished. His hands were steady. The hearing chamber was packed. Media, government staff, families of those involved in the crash. Cameras rolled quietly as Maria Chen testified before the panel. She recounted the facts with clarity. Delta Freight's systemic safety violations, the falsified labels, the dispatch threats. She ended her statement by holding up the dash cam photo. Eddie's hands gripping the wheel, eyes locked on the road, rain streaking across the glass. "This," she said, "is what courage looks like." They called Eddie next. He stood slowly, walked to the front of the chamber, and adjusted the microphone. I'm not much for speeches, he began, but I've been thinking a lot about what happened. The room quieted. I didn't think I'd survive that crash. I just knew someone had to do something. I saw the bus, I saw the tanker, and I knew I had maybe 3 seconds to choose. He paused, swallowing hard. I don't think I'm special. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I loved someone once who always believed in doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Especially then. He looked around the room. I didn't save those kids because I'm brave. I saved them because I could. And if I could go back, I'd do it again. When he stepped down, there was no applause, just silence. But it was the kind of silence that holds reverence, respect, and something close to healing. That spring, Eddie moved out of the shelter and into a small rental home on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and an old porch, but it was his. He fixed it up slowly, sanding the railings, repainting the shutters. He didn't return to long-haul trucking. Instead, he took a job delivering supplies to rural clinics and schools, short routes, familiar roads. Quiet work, the kind that lets a man think. He kept in touch with Maria Chen. She visited once a month, sometimes bringing updates on the Delta Freight investigation. Several executives had been indicted, and the company was under federal scrutiny. Sometimes she didn't talk shop at all. They'd sit on the porch, drink coffee, and talk about anything but the past. One afternoon she asked, "Do you regret it?" Eddie thought a long time. "No," he said at last. "I just wish Rosa had seen it." Maria smiled softly. "I think she did." On the anniversary of the crash, Eddie returned to the intersection. A plaque had been installed near the sidewalk. It read, "In honor of those who choose sacrifice over safety." Dedicated to Edward Ramirez, whose courage gave others a future. Beneath it, someone had tied a bouquet of wildflowers. There was a note attached, written in a child's careful scrawl. "Thank you for saving my school." Eddie stood in silence for a long while, the wind brushing his jacket. He didn't need the cameras or the headlines. He didn't need the medal someone once offered, and he quietly declined. He had peace now. And for a man like Eddie Ramirez, that was everything.